Welcome to Interview from Mexico. I'm Laura Carlsen, and I'll be your host as we look at cutting-edge issues with the men and women who know them best, here on teleSUR.
Les quiero informar que el 6 de agosto pasado se derramaron 40,000 metros cúbicos de sulfato de cobre acidulado en el arroyo Tinajas, municipio de Cananea, Sonora.
By some calculations, up to a third of national territory in Mexico has been granted in concessions to mining operations. Much of this is open pit mining. As foreign companies seek to extract Mexican minerals as rapidly and as thoroughly as possible, what's the impact on Mexican communities and on the environment?
Grupo México con sus minas en Cananea y en Buenavista del Cobre han estado derramando sus líquidos.
To talk about the role of mining in Mexico's future, we're very happy to be here today with Miguel Mijangos. Miguel, welcome to Interviews from Mexico. Miguel is a member of the Mexican network of those affected by mining. Miguel, mining has always been a feature of Mexico's history, and it was certainly all important in the colonial period. What's different about this expansion of mining today?
Well, I think that in synthesis there are two big differences, right? Since the whole process of colonization began and the whole process of exploitation of minerals in the last no more than 50 years ago, all the gold extracted in Latin America in less than 50 years with the new technologies has practically doubled. In just 50 years, they've taken what they took in nearly 500 years of the whole process of colonization. This means that today they use a technique or various techniques that are extremely aggressive. The most aggressive of these is open pit mining, which is literally linked to searching for any quantity of metals that are dispersed in the surface and under the surface.
So just to get an image, to do this, they have to tear down the hillsides, right?
Yes, literally this part of the problem. To get at one metal, they take out all the metals that are associated with that one, that most interests them. But practically all the metals will be found there together, and the vast majority of are metals that are classified as toxic, and when they are liberated and come into contact with the water, the oxygen, and the sun, they become a real problem for the environment and for human beings.
And then you mentioned the chemicals that they use to extract the minerals from the soil, right?
Yes, actually, what they do is once they pulverize everything, they apply acids to create a leaching process. So, for example, in the case of precious metals, they use basically mercury or they use sodium cyanide, and both are super dangerous. And in the case, for example, of iron, they use sulfuric acids, which in this case is also toxic. This is only in the leaching process. There are other chemicals that are also used during the process of preparation, of the purification of the metals. And this means that obviously there are risks, no? And the harm that is generated based on the size of the projects that we have today, since the use of these techniques are obviously much more aggressive.
So we're in a period where the process of extraction is much more intensive. How extensive is it? How much of Mexico's national territory is now covered by mining concessions?
Well, look, in terms of what today we see as the expansion of the mining policy, the new techniques mean that practically all of entire national territory has the potential for the extraction metals. It's what we call the extractive mining model, and it's based precisely on this technique of open pit mining and of pipe mining, which is another very similar technique that obtains very little of the metal compared to the available earth. What does this mean in Mexico? So it depends on what data we use. If we use the government's figures, they say that 20% of national territory has been granted in mining concessions to private capital.
20%?
If we use a study that we did with other groups that are part of the opposition, we're talking about close to 35 to 38% of territory. And if we use one that the Fraser Institute presented in Vancouver, which is financed by a large number of mining companies,
because many of them are Canadian, right?
It's close to 90 million hectares, which is equivalent to close to 50% of the national territory that has already been given out in concessions. So, well, the dimensions of the problem we have is obviously linked to the occupation of territory to create a condition of looting in which the people are very affected.
Well, what does this do to a community to have a large mine come in?
It's terrible. Look, the national network of those affected by mining, or REMA, which also belongs to the Mesoamerican movement against the extractive mining model, began to note that the communities that had let the companies in rapidly in 2 or 3 years began to have various serious health consequences. So we began to document harm, and we focused on these communities, 3 communities, and one in Guatemala, one in Honduras, and one in Mexico, all 3 that worked with the company Goldcorp. We chose Goldcorp for several reasons. First, because it's today the company that extracts more gold throughout the world than any other. It's also a company among the most disciplined, say, in terms of how they handle code of ethics and social responsibility that they say they take into account. And in spite of their supposed discipline, for example, we found that in Carrizalillo, there isn't a single family that doesn't have a member who is sick linked to the process of extraction of minerals. There are families where all the members are sick, and when we break it down to, for example, the damages to the skin, we find there's percentages of 66% of the population that's sick.
Tell us a bit about Carrizalillo. It's one of the biggest mines in Mexico, isn't it?
The mine of Carrizalillo, or the Goldcorp project in Carrizalillo, is called Los Filos. In 2007, it was Goldcorp's largest project. They had about 7 projects on the level of Latin America. Today, they have 11 projects. It's the 5th largest project in Goldcorp now. That is, Carrizalillo helped them to carry out a project of expansion in other places, right? So a big mine, one of the largest now, is in Zacatecas, which is the Peñasquito mine. The mine, the Los Filos mine, is a mine that occupies close to 2,000 hectares.
And we should mention that this mine's in the state of Guerrero. And Guerrero's a state that has a lot of problems.
Yes, the Los Filos mine is located precisely in what is now the zone of most conflict and violence that we have in the state. It's practically right next to Iguala and Chilpancingo, just 6 or 7 kilometers from Cocula, which is very well known today due to the issue of the disappearances of Ayotzinapa. It's an area, a zone that is known as the Gold Belt. That is, there is a large area that has a proportion of a lot of greed in terms of gold in various companies. There are 4 companies that are occupying close to 100 to 150,000 hectares, all of them Canadian as it happens to be. In all of the communities surrounding that area, not more than 35, 40 communities, but a lot have serious problems of displacement, of looting, of violence, of kidnappings, of assassinations, in addition to extortion.
Besides the effects on health that you've mentioned, you've begun a study to monitor these. What can we say about the environmental effects?
The environmental damage is terrible. It dries up the springs on the one hand, and on the other hand, it contaminates those that are left. All the ground cover disappears, the animals can't survive, and it creates conditions that, in the best case scenario, well, some studies say that they are projects that pollute the earth for more than 500 years.
Miguel, I want to come back to the environmental impact, and especially this question of water, which is central to mining activities here in Mexico. We'll be right back after a short pause. We're back with Miguel Mijangos from the Mexican network of those affected by mining. Miguel, we were talking about the environmental impact of mining in the country, which has experienced a boon in recent years. And one of the key impacts has to do with water. What is the impact of mining on water here in Mexico?
Well, look, with the technique of open pit mining, they need a huge amount of water, no? I'll give you the example of Los Filos, the big Goldcorp mine. Just in the project of expansion of their project, that is when they still aren't operating at 100%, they use 250 million liters of water a day.
That's a quantity that most people can't even envision.
Of course, it's immense, but in addition, all this water gets mixed with sodium cyanide, and that's where it makes the leaching process. That means that it's water that literally will end up contaminated. And every day, it's the same thing. Every day, they pour in 18 tons of sodium cyanide, and this is repeated constantly.
Well, what do they do with that water?
There's a part that they use for the leaching process. That is for some sort of melting the rocks. It's an effect like making coffee. You pour the water through and the liquid comes out. That's more or less the logic of leaching, to get the metals out. And there's another part that they dump into waterways.
So they just dump that water in the rivers in the surrounding area?
There's a part that they dump directly into the rivers. There's another part that due to the huge size of the projects, evaporates. There's a big problem with pollution for evaporation that is being caused here. And also, well, obviously, the other big issue that we see quite often in many parts of the world, the rupture of the containment ponds. They break, and these are the ones that most pollute. We have many cases. The most famous in Mexico is Grupo México.
In Sonora.
But we've also had 4 times that the dikes ruptured, and
where in Carrizalillo. That hardly has been in the news.
There has never been a process of supervision or contingency plan on the part of the Mexican government. They have, we call it a good program of damage control. This company, they are very careful with this kind of thing.
Damage control in terms of its image.
Yes, that is, every time there are accidents, whenever there are deaths, when there is an explosion that ends up hurting a worker, they contain the information and it usually doesn't get out.
Well, does the government levy fines against them, at least for this kind of damage to the environment or to labor rights?
No. Generally, the government fines them when there is a grassroots mobilization that publicizes the case. For example, we now are in Guerrero, just had, there's a politician whose name is Rito Zurita, who is in charge of projects on the state level, or he was in charge in the last government on the state level. He had created a civic association, which is the Institute of Ecology, and they just gave Goldcorp and the Torrescorp Gold, which is right next to it, a prize for green mining or sustainable mining. And the Goldcorp there in Carrizalillo has received the Certificate of Clean Industry from the Profepa, which is the Mexican Environmental Protection Agency. Now, this clearly shows that there's a high level of corruption, a level of incompatibility between the work that the public policy should do in terms of control of this kind of damages that these companies generate. This is a very serious problem that we have here in Mexico. We already have a weak law, but the tools that the law provides to stop the mines, if we were to implement it correctly, we would stop them.
In general, what would you call the policy of the government? Would you characterize it as pro-mining?
Totally. We have today a government that is not only pro-mining, it's giving away all the natural resources of the peoples. Gas, biodiversity, water, minerals, petroleum. That is all the logic of the current extractive model that is linked, in that in some ways it's the same technique that is used.
So what's in it for them? They really believe that this will lead to progress and development, that this is the path forward for Mexico?
No. For us, it's very clear that the government is not looking at the logic of accounting of the pluses and minuses. There's total corruption. That is, it's not possible that they don't realize that this does not lead to progress and development. The damages are immense.
Especially if we look in the long term.
In the long term, and furthermore, we have experiences in Latin America that are terrible in this sense. This is not a question that isn't scientifically documented, that isn't certified in some way by many processes of resistance that exist in the world. There are countries that have prohibited open mining, pit mining. The European Union Parliament, Costa Rica, there's a moratorium in El Salvador. There are regions in Argentina. That is to say, this isn't a problem that is just coming up now. It's a problem that is already established, and that unfortunately Mexico has not followed this critical route. And instead, the government continues to insist in handing over resources to the mining companies in a biased and unconditioned way, with total impunity.
Well, when we talk about this expansion of mining to, by some calculations, more than half of the territory, what happens to other uses? What happens to the farmers who are there now if the land is being converted to this intensive mining model?
A month ago, they held the 31st convention of mining in the port of Acapulco, and the representative of the mining industry in this convention asked the Mexican government for three very interesting things that are terrible. He asked it to modify the laws even more because the communities were disturbing the development of investment.
That they're disturbing?
Así lo dijo literalmente, porque también las pirámides, es decir, nuestro patrimonio histórico, también está estorbando.
That's literally what he said, because in addition, the pyramids that are our national heritage are also in the way, and even nature itself. This gives you a clear idea of where this famous progress and development with corporate social responsibility model is going. This is a symptom. But we also have in the mining law, which is extremely regressive. It's a law from 1992 that has an article, Article 6, that says that mining is of preferential use in the country. That is to say, it is held above food farming. It's above biodiversity and above the pyramids.
Excuse me for interrupting. We're going to go to another pause and come right back to this discussion because this is shocking information. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're here talking to Miguel Mijangos about mining in Mexico. Miguel, we were talking about the shocking privileges that are granted to the mining companies here in Mexico by the government and what they get away with and some of the damages to society and to the environment. We're really seeing a boom lately in mining in the country, but recently there's been a drop in the price of minerals. Do you think that's going to have effect on this process of expansion?
Por ejemplo, en el caso del oro, obviamente
For example, in the case of gold, obviously it reached peak prices close to $2,000 an ounce, but in reality its average has fluctuated between $1,200 to $1,400 an ounce. So this, of course, does not affect all the investment environment. So much so that there are more companies operating in Mexico now than 3 or 4 years ago. 4 years ago, when there was the boom in the prices, we had around 800 projects operating. Now, we have close to 1,300 projects operating. And for us, there are several reasons that explain not only this behavior of industry, people whining about the prices. Consider, how much does Mexico sell its gold to Goldcorp for? 7% of the sales, royalties. This is what it costs. And each hectare of the concession in the first 3 years costs 8 pesos.
8 pesos to rent a hectare for mining.
After 10 years, they could pay up to 70 pesos per hectare.
Just still nothing.
And the gold, we're literally giving it away. We don't even have a business where we receive like 50% or 40%. No.
So Mexico is giving away its gold, and we're talking about a non-renewable resource.
It's gold, it's silver, it's gas, coal. Literally all of our minerals are being looted and handed over, given away. So if they are taking it out for free, all that they generate in earnings is profit that just keeps piling up. Imagine in Carrizalillo, they take out about 4 billion pesos annually. More or less, this is the amount at the previous cost of the dollar. They leave 1.7% to the community, and the government supposedly gets, they're going to leave about 320 million if the government has the possibility of supervising the sales process, which is not part of the law, because furthermore, it's utterly non-transparent. They say that it's 7.5% of royalties, but there isn't a single article or clause that enables us to know whether what they pay is open or non-transparent. Of course, it's non-transparent.
So there's no government agency that actually checks up on what the companies report in order to substantiate the royalties that are owed?
There isn't any procedure, and we have to look up the information in the Canadian stock market because there they do have regulation. But so then, in terms of having official documents, there's a very peculiar duality, as we say. And on the other hand, there's the condition that the companies have created this ability, which isn't an ability, it's a strategy, to create these philanthropic foundations. So the philanthropic foundation called X will now, when they pay royalties, they can offset it by tax deductions. That is to say, it's a barbarity what is happening.
Well, we don't have a lot of time left in the show, and I want to turn to community organizing. You're a member of the Mexican network of those affected by mining. What are the communities that are feeling these health impacts, that are feeling these environmental impacts, doing to defend themselves?
Well, in the REMA, we have basically 5 strategies of work, and the most important for us is what we call the preventative phase. Its goal is to establish political and legal conditions to establish mining-free territories. Yes, we know that when a community has already signed with a company and the company is already mining there, it's very difficult to get out.
Well, do we have any territories, or are there communities or parts of Mexico that have declared themselves free of mining?
We have close to 2,000 communities that have already had a declaration of mining-free territory, that have agrarian assemblies refusing mining, that are working on their statutes or their internal regulations to refuse mining, and other projects that correspond to this extractive model. Moreover, there's a strong group, maybe 100 or 120 communities, where we filed injunctions and where we have achieved a suspension of mining company plans. That is to say, they are not able to operate.
Does the government respect that, though?
It has to respect it because in the case of the injunctions, it's a
legal instrument.
A legal instrument mandated by a judge. Although obviously in the legal battle there are appeals, no? For example, in San Miguel de Progreso, in Guerrero, the government, even the judge ruled that it's true that the concession was granted without consulting the community. And the government responds in a terrible way to the judge, saying, why do we have to consult? They have not proven that they are an indigenous community, and we only have to consult with indigenous peoples.
Well, what can the rest of society do to monitor and to support this process in defense of social rights and of the environment?
There are many ways that they can help us. There is a part that we call it, as a part of our strategy, the demystification of the mining model. It's very important that society knows that we are involved in a very major policy of extractivism, and so the people need to become more aware of the problems that we are experiencing in the regions. And if they don't assume a more participative role, sooner or later, the problems of pollution will reach them, of water, which will be the most serious because these companies use a lot of water, and also with the consumption, since they continue to apply a policy that for us is totally wrong. So there are many ways that people can help out beyond the process of local resistance that are important to support.
And that are also linking up among themselves too. Well, it's a problem that affects all of us. Miguel Mijangos, thanks so much for being with us here today on Interviews from Mexico. And thank you, I'm Laura Carlsen. We'll be back next week on Interviews from Mexico.